My name is Dr. Jalonne White-Newsome, and I am a wife, a mom of two beautiful girls, a lifelong advocate of the environment and people, and I'm the new CEO and founder of Empowering a Green Environment and Economy, LLC. Empowering a Green Environment and Economy, LLC, or what I like to say is EGE squared for short, is a strategic and environmental business consulting firm. We're headquartered right here in Southeastern Michigan, and we partner with all types of organizations, whether it be government, quasi-government, um, to really help them create and implement a vision, a plan, or strategy that will not only protect the environment, but protect people and improve the economy. And we primarily provide program, strategic planning, design, evaluation, research, facilitation and training, and most important, implementation. As a trained engineer, where I spent probably most of my life, and then getting my doctorate in public health, since middle school, I have loved solving problems. And particularly as those problems related to our environment, so our air, water, and land. But what I found after working in industry for 20 plus years, after working in government across sectors, is that oftentimes we have these great efforts to protect the environment, but oftentimes those efforts and solutions leave out people. And so those solutions end up being more detrimental to the health of people, more detrimental to the economy, and actually not really beneficial to anyone. So more than ever, I would say in 2021, our clients that include, again, government, for-profits, and nonprofits are really asking a couple of key questions that will maybe give you a sense of kind of the work and the problem solving that we do. So one question that I always get from my clients, how can we better plan and protect our communities from the impacts of climate change? Another question is, how do we actually integrate equity into our planning, our strategy, and the services that we offer our communities to make sure that we're actually reaching everyone and achieving our mission? Another is, how do we actually measure our impact? Are we having any impact, and can we increase our impact and hold ourselves accountable? And then the last question, which I think is super important that I get a lot, is how do we begin to change our internal culture so we can actually better serve not only our staff, but the communities that we're supposed to serve. And so this is just a sample of some of the challenges that we take on at EG Squared as a consultancy. And as the managing principal, kind of a combination of my educational experience and actual on the ground experience, particularly in issues of racial equity, climate change, and public health, is really, I would say, the work that we're really excited about doing. I don't think people are bad people. I don't think organizations inherently want to hurt or harm people, but we don't often consider what harm has been done in the past and then how our present solutions might actually make it worse. And so as we think about where we are now as a society where racial equity and advancing racial equity is at the top of everyone's minds, what's most important is that we begin to ask the right questions. And part of those questions come in, why is equity important? and that it's not just the buzzword or the cool thing to do. And then actually, how do you begin to operationalize equity in the work that you're doing? And so that's super important, because what 2020 and 2021 and even decades before have shown us is that there are certain communities, Black and brown communities, poor communities, immigrants, and others that continue to get the short end of the stick, whether it's from access to health care, living in a clean environment, or having access to jobs that aren't hazardous to their health. So what we try and do at Empowering a Green Environment and Economy is looking at that entire picture, acknowledging that there are some historical pieces that we have to consider when we're crafting our solutions, understanding that there are some folks that are more vulnerable or higher at risk for the solutions that we propose, and that we have to do that in a way where we keep people at the center. And so our mission is to actually transform communities through people-centered solutions. And so keeping people center helps us build on one of our values, which is equity and transparency. That's a great question. And I would say a lot of my white friends and colleagues and neighbors ask me that same question. I've never experienced this, so how can I even begin to help solve it? Or how can I kind of dig into something that I don't understand. And in some cases, I have some friends that still don't really figure this thing called systemic racism and institutional racism actually exists, because they see people of color doing well. I mean, we had a Black president, right? So what I try and say is that it starts with really education. So there are so many resources out there, books that are beginning to kind of really, kind of dig into this. What is racism? How can I be an anti-racist, and what that really looks like? I think it's also exposing yourselves to different folks beyond your circle. So diversifying your friendship circles, and really kind of sitting back and listening, and thinking about, and taking in some of the experiences that you may have never talked about. I think it's also really thinking about, okay, how can I show up in this space, or in whatever space you're in, whether it's in a C-suite corporate room or at the grocery store, how can I begin to be a little bit more observant and be an ally in those situations, and call out when I see inequities or injustices happening. So I think it's kind of a spectrum of education, learning, personal and self-awareness, and then actually kind of stepping out. And when you have those opportunities, being an ally, speaking up, or pointing out when there's an obvious wrong, or you're beginning to see it, so that awareness begins to build, even though you might not have personally experienced it yourself. And so I think that's inherently why I decided to start Empowering a Green Environment Economy, is to help facilitate some of those hard conversations. I think it starts with really understanding, what's important, and what are those shared values that we can come together on. So, politics, religion, like all these critical issues might divide us, but inherently everybody cares about something. And particularly in a workplace where you're trying to begin these, as you said, create courageous conversations. One of my clients now that I'm working with, they provide services to over 3 million people in Canada. And, beginning to have these conversations about race and social equity in a place where that's not what we really talk about is hard, and it can be challenging. But the fact of the matter is, when you begin to address those structural inequities, when you begin to acknowledge the historical hurts and harms that you've done to people, particularly when you're in a position of service, whether you're providing, critical services to a large amount of people, or working at the local grocery store, inherently keeping people and values at the center of whatever you do, whenever you have that conversation, is important. So we might not agree on everything, but if we're all shooting for this outcome where we have jobs that we can go to, where we're not fighting another pandemic in a couple of years, where we all want good access to education for our kids, like there are things, I believe people have more in common than we have differences. And so part of what I'm trying to do through my consultancy is bring folks together to have these courageous conversations, understand that we're not going to agree and be happy go lucky about everything, but to at least appreciate the process of thinking and talking and being courageous, and really understanding like we're all shooting for the same thing. We want to be healthy, we want to make money, we want to take care of our families, we have people we care about. How do we get there together? And how do we make sure that whatever path that we're trailblazing is one that we would want our children to follow in, and that will, again, set it up for that next generation to be even more successful, happy, and live in a healthy environment. Brilliance, creativity, problem solving is not limited to one race, gender, or ethnicity, right? And in fact, I would say most research shows that the more diverse and inclusive your environment is, the better in terms of making profit and actually moving on your strategic mission. So the research shows that it's better to be diverse and inclusive. And so if we really want our economy and society to thrive, we must eliminate like those invisible and visible barriers that keep, budding entrepreneurs, particularly entrepreneurs of color, from being a part of our economy. Because again, we're missing out. Like if we don't have a nice diverse set, again, race, gender, ethnicity, of entrepreneurs that are helping solve some of the most pressing problems in our world, then we're going to continue to shoot ourselves in the foot. We're not going to get anywhere, because I tell you, when you have all of these different perspectives in the room, when you have all these different experiences, it makes a more robust set of solutions come to play. And so when I started this work back in 2009, where I was working through my company, Empowering a Green Environment Economy, but I was doing pro bono work. So I was basically kind of one of the few African-American women that were talking about climate change and racial equity and public health all together intersectionally. But again, what I found is that, you know, now, even though the dialogue has changed and more people, unfortunately, you know, have had to think about these large issues, is that if we don't have that lived experience in the room when people are making policy decisions, budget decisions, strategy decisions, then we're going to miss the mark, and our solutions are not going to actually get at the root cause of the problem. So whether that's public health, climate change, or our economic crisis. So we have to have a diverse set of folks in the room, I think, to be the society that we want to be. You know, actually, I announced my business, EJ Squared, on February 1st. So I think that was super significant, not just because it was, you know, February 1st and kind of my new independence, but also the fact that I shared, I think on a Facebook post or a LinkedIn post, that we make Black history every day. So it is definitely not limited to these 28 days. Every day that Black folks get up in the morning and go and do whatever great work in whatever capacity, we are making Black history. And that is super important to me, because as I think about the strong line of entrepreneurs that I come from in my family, my mom, for example, has been a business owner for over 40 years. And she came up in a time where it was hard, and it's still hard in some ways, for an African-American woman starting a business to get financial resources, to get a loan, to even get a contract. And she ended up being the first in many ways to get large government contracts, particularly in her field. And so I know that even my grandparents, when they started their small businesses coming up from Mississippi to Detroit. So all that history is super important, because not only understanding that our folks, our people, were going through these challenges decades ago that some of us as Black entrepreneurs still face now, but the fact that I have a strong legacy behind me that I want to continue going. And so I think, as you know, as important as Black History Month is, we have to remember that, again, we acknowledge and respect the past and those folks that have, again, blazed that trail for us. But as I think about, one of the primary reasons that I started Empowering a Green Environment Economy is because I also want to be that piece of history for my two daughters. They are now in the 7th and 9th grade, and I want them to know that Black folks, we aren't only making history as having the first African-American vice president, but also there's folks making Black history in their communities, in their neighborhoods, and in their home. And so it is a constant reminder that we acknowledge and respect our history, but it also reminds us that we have to continue to go forward. You know, I often think about mentors and role models that have transitioned to heaven that have really shaped my life. And one of those folks she was a native Detroiter, Mama Lala Cabell, who did a lot of work around water affordability and water equity in the city of Detroit. And I often think about Mama Lala because she, again, was this wonderful leader, very modest and humble, but strong. She represented, again, the city that I love, that I grew up in, that helped make me Detroit. But she did it in a way where she always acknowledged the fact that all these resources, whether it be water, land, et cetera, that we take for granted, is not ours, but it is our job to take care of it. And so I think for me, in addition to my family and the folks that have, again, shaped my life, I think about my mentors like Mama Lala Cabell. I think of my mentors and some of my past bosses, Cecil Corbin Mark, who did a lot of environmental justice work in Harlem, New York, and taught me about leading with love in whatever I do. So whatever situation I'm in, whether I'm talking to someone on Capitol Hill or talking to someone in a big corporation or a utility or a large nonprofit, what I try and carry with me is kind of the values these folks have instilled in me. So as I do the consulting work, it's beyond the profit piece for me. It's about people and making a better place for us all to thrive and live, particularly those of us that have been invisible or ignored or not brought into the process, particularly as it relates to the environments that we live, work, play, and pray in. Some type of billboard, I guess, that I would say to share what we're trying to do and the change that we're trying to make is that it would basically say something like, you know, do you care about the environment you live in? Do you care about the next generation? Let's get rid of the excuses and let's get to work.